I am Brother Cornell West.
This is Chris Hedges.
I'm Rosa Clemente.
Hey, what's up? This is Chuck D, Public Enemy, Prophets of Rage.
And this is Newsbeat.
Peace and love, everybody. It's your man, Manny Faces. Oh. Yeah, we're here. Where'd you think we were going to be?
And it's hot.
Man, I mean, you talking about me, though? Thank you. I appreciate you. It's your man, Manny Faces, rocking with you one time. Once again, this week in social justice, presented by the Newsbeat Podcast, the award-winning mix of social justice journalism and original hip-hop. How can we do that?
Trying to get my background ready. So
what are you doing? I thought we were all set up.
Look at this. We were, and something happened. You know how it goes. We're live. The preparation. We're going live.
Amateur hour over here.
Do it live, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll do it live. It's all good. If you're watching on the video, you're getting this bonus content. If you're listening on the podcast, you won't even hear it. I'll take it all out because it's ridiculous. It's crazy. Anyway, so this week in social justice. Your man Manny Faces rocking with the Newsbeat Podcast crew, including Rashid Mian and Chris Tawarski, the managing editor and editor-in-chief, respectively. Gentlemen, how are you both on this hot summer day?
I think you described it.
Yeah, man. It is hot, and the title of this episode is "Oh My God, It's Hot Out," and that's right. So we are not wasting any time or mincing any words. But not only is it hot, because we are a social justice-oriented show, we will speak tonight about what that heat means. You might be inconvenienced. Your AC might be struggling today, wherever you are in the country. It depends. You know, there's a couple of spots that are probably most of us are really hot. You might be comfortable. You might have all the bells and whistles in your HVAC unit, right? You might be good to go, but there are a lot of people that are not good to go, and not only just being inconvenienced or uncomfortable, but being
but by design.
But by design. So there is a social justice component to this heat that we're going to get into tonight, because we bring you the things that you won't hear about on the news. Because if you watch the news tonight, you'll hear that Bill Cosby's been released from prison. And I think they got that mistaken. We said free Britney, not free Cosby. I'm not
on fire. Fire tonight.
Lost in translation. We have a great guest. We have some topics to talk about tonight. Stories that we've been following for you that have been horrific, but necessary. A little bit outside of our United States jurisdiction, but no less important. We're going to talk about that. We have an incredible guest to talk to tonight. Rashid, I think you introduce the guest normally. Who are we speaking to tonight?
Yeah, we're going to talk to Vivek Shandas from Portland State University, and Newsbeat followers. I forget what Chris termed them a couple weeks ago, but I think we have a name for everybody now.
It was Newsbeat Nation, but
Newsbeat Nation, right?
But
I don't know if we've settled on that.
We're going to be covering a lot of issues with the First Nations, so I didn't want to.
So you don't want to do that. Okay. Well, our crew, our devoted followers.
I haven't settled on Newsbeat Nation, so maybe we should take a vote what the Newsbeat followers should be called. We'll have to get some
I guess
input.
we'll just let them name. We'll let them name themselves.
Hellraisers.
That's the
Hellraisers.
most democratic way
World
to do it.
changers. How about
Right,
that?
indeed.
What I was gonna say.
Yeah.
What I was gonna say is that they may be familiar with the episode we did concerning redlining and climate change, and Vivek was on that episode breaking it all down for us. So definitely stay tuned because Vivek is out in Portland. He's in the belly of the beast right now. So it's definitely important to get some information from him. So we're looking forward to that.
All right. In the meantime, let's get into our Newsbeat News Bites. But wait a second. I hear that there's some breaking news during our show. That's crazy. We do it live, but it's not always, breaking news.
Look at that trio.
Some guy named Donald Ramsfeld. Donald Ramsfeld was a defense linebacker. Wait, what is this? Oh, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld during the Iraq War. This guy's dead.
It happened.
I wonder how
What does it
far
say right
down.
there? What does it say right there?
How
Can
far
you do
down?
a Command F? I guess maybe for lies.
Right.
Maybe the word torture.
How far down in the story do you got to go to count the
see.
civilian deaths?
We got an old school cool pick.
Is that in the lead? Is that in the
Okay.
lead? Is that
Oh,
in the
look,
nut graph?
we're already making him look good.
Yeah.
I don't
No.
see it. It's hard to read. I don't know for the podcast listeners. We're trying to help you out here. I don't know.
What
if
am
I
I
see
looking
anything
for?
about torture.
I'm looking for lies, false, war, unauthorized. I don't see anything like that.
Regime change. You see that?
Wait,
You got
nothing-
regime change?
Wait, nothing-
Innovative plan. Innovative
Oh,
plan.
innovative.
Yeah.
That's what we're going with now.
Well, anyway, this guy died, and so be it. Chris, you were gonna say hundreds of.
Of thousands dead. I mean, where's
No,
that? I
I
don't see
don't-
that in the headline.
I mean, it's kind of mentioned, but not in the way that we would like it to be mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, there's that. So anyway, moving along, our Newsbeat News Bites, where we break down some of the social justice things you might not be hearing about because the news is going to be talking about Donald Ramsfeld and not Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, not Britney Spears. These are our Newsbeat News Bites. Rashed, you are up first, sir, with this incredible piece of news.
I found this on the Twitter this morning, and Mandy, if you could play that video that I think we have from Clint Smith, are you able to do that?
I am.
All right,
I love
this is from
Clint
the Majority Report, really quick.
Clint Smith just wrote a book, right?
Yep.
A great book. Anyway, here's the clip you're referring to. Check this out, people.
In 2018, you have a study from the Southern Poverty Law Center that shows that only 8% of U.S. high school seniors are able to identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War, because our teaching around it has been so people are either scared to address it at all, right, for fear that something will happen. And I think we see in state legislatures across the country an intentional effort to amplify and magnify that chilling effect, to make teachers scared to even touch this stuff, so that you continue to have young people growing up with a skewed sense of what the Confederacy was, what slavery was, and thus how it has shaped the social, economic, and political landscape of our country today.
Wow. So this is incredible. So this is Clint Smith talking about, I'll give you some context about the uproar over critical race theory, how all these now school boards, Republicans, right-wingers don't want their kids to be taught about sort of institutional racism and how that shaped the country, even though, as you could tell, our current curricula isn't doing a good enough job. So he said right there that 8% of high school students cannot identify slavery as the central cause for the Civil War. And we were laughing at it, but it's also important because if you guys just think about the last couple of years, the uproars over Confederate statues and symbols and the like, and how the issue is for the protectors of those things. The issue is always framed as is our culture. This was our culture. It had nothing to do with slavery. But all you have to do, and I always point to this, Ta-Nehisi Coates several years ago when he was still with the Atlantic, he did a piece. Basically, he just took all the Confederate states and their generals and found their diaries and their own words to sort of refute that argument. I'm going to give you a really quick citation here, and it's from Mississippi. And this is what they wrote. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. I'm just going to stop there because there's more, but I don't think it's necessary.
That's all you
need. It's really incredible that I guess maybe, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the reason. Maybe Civil War history is basically Abraham Lincoln abolishing slavery, and that's it. But when I saw that, I was amazed. I don't know about you guys.
I didn't read the whole thing. What do they attribute the start of the Civil War to? Like a rat beef? Like what, like what, what do they think happened? And what are we teaching these folks? It's really an astonishing number to say.
Yeah, I think that's my
8%.
question. My question is, because I'm just trying to go back to my history lessons, and I just always go back to Abe Lincoln, and that's just the one face that you attribute to the Civil War, and that's basically it. And it was about you don't hear about the Confederate generals. Yeah. You don't learn about them or the president that they installed for themselves. So it is incredible, and it's also related to the uproar over critical race theory. So I definitely wanted to get this out there.
It is, and if you're watching us now or listening to us a couple episodes ago of This Week in Social Justice, we had a great conversation about critical race theory that really broke down some of the issues. I know a lot of people are talking about it, but we're your friends and we bring it to you right. So check that out if you haven't. If you really want to maybe it's been hovering and you want to get to the bottom of it. We had a great talk.
And I just want to add, obviously, as Rashad said, incredibly disturbing, and it just obviously it just doesn't end just with this, right? What's the percentage of the people that believe the Holocaust didn't exist? You could go down the list here, and it speaks to what we're trying to do, which is sort of shine a light and talk about the truth, the things that for some reason or other does not get put in the history books. So.
Yeah, it's also a stark contrast to the 56% of people in the world that believe that Manny Faces is my real name. So that's interesting. Let me move on to my News Bite. This is just came up. I love how you guys spend a lot of time trying to find your news bites, and I basically just pick the last thing that I see before we come on.
I'm going through Twitter. I'm going through subtweets, subreddits.
I search for weeks. No, I'm joking.
I just look at the news and be like, oh, this looks
Not
good.
Really, but
28 minutes ago, it was reported on the Associated Press that the UNC trustees, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, approved the journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones's tenure bid. This ties into the whole thing we're talking about. Nicole Hannah-Jones was responsible for the 1619 Project in a large part. She had won a Pulitzer Prize that was not rescinded for the work on New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project, focusing on the country's history of slavery. She would be joining the journalism school's faculty as the Knight Chair in Race and Investigative Journalism in July with a 5-year contract. But that tenure was rescinded or wasn't being given, or some shenanigans were happening. It was a big uproar. And again, it had to do... I want to go back to this. There was a donor. I think this had to do with a donor. And they wouldn't, the school hasn't said why the tenure wasn't offered, but a prominent donor revealed that he had emailed the university leaders, quote, challenging her work as highly contentious and highly controversial. So again, the idea that we're teaching slavery, that we're teaching the history of the country is what did it say? Highly contentious and highly controversial. Ties into the critical race theory discussion. Ties in this. Anyway, point
is slavery the controversy, or is it the 1619 Project? I don't understand.
I understand that there's been some talk about the 1619 Project and how it presents things and da-da-da-da. But that's okay. We can have discussions and debates about, how things are presented that are trying to interpret or tell a story or tell a historical account. But the facts remain the facts, and nothing the 1619 Project did, to my knowledge anyway, I'm not, the scholar on this subject, changed the facts that should be taught, maybe the interpretation, maybe how we're going to look at it, maybe how we're going to present it. We can have those discussions, but you don't terminate somebody's already preordained tenure track because they happen to be involved in a Pulitzer Prize winning exploration of the topic. So anyway, but a closed door meeting was held. I suppose an anonymous vote was held, a la the Senate when they don't want to get called out on anything, and they have reinstated her tenure bid. I thought it was important to know that. I think it was probably due to backlash. I think it was probably due to attention. And I think it was probably due to squeaky wheels getting the grease. So while we think our voices don't get heard and while we think our votes don't count, it's another example of very local, very small wins that can affect big change. So that was my news bite for the week.
Also, I thought cancel culture was bad. So.
Oh, no, it's only bad. See, they want to cancel the people they want to cancel, but they don't want to be canceled
I see.
By the people that want them canceled. It's very simple. Chris?
Thanks for explaining.
Thanks, man. No problem.
Yeah, just on that, what you had just said about how important, speaking up and raising these issues are. This next issue, my news bite, is about the horrific discovery just today. Well, it's really the announcement of the discovery. This was discovered last year, but so first of all, it's 182 unmarked graves near the site of a former residential school in Canada, and that school is called St. Eugene's Mission School. And I don't know how closely all your listeners are following this stuff, but a couple weeks ago, in our last episode, we covered and discussed the very first of these schools to make headlines around the world for 215 graves of children found at one of these schools. And since then, there was another one that got 751 unmarked graves that were found. And we said in the last episode that was not going to be the end of it, and it definitely is not going to be the end of it. There's going to be many more of this. We're going to talk more in depth about this issue in a couple minutes. But yeah, this just broke today, and one of the reasons for the delay in this getting announced is that a lot of times it's left up to the community itself to literally rent ground penetrating radar and search for their ancestors and their loved ones. And we'll go in more depth about this, but it's important that we're staying on top of this. So
yeah, crazy story, ridiculous. Again, I only know this because we do this. I heard little tidbits of it, throughout, and that's if my nose is pressed to the news. So thank you, Chris. You've really been on top of the story, and I appreciate it. Is that it for our Newsbeat News Bites?
That's it.
I believe so.
I got a little distracted there, and you always spin my head with this story. So, all right, cool. One more time, we have a guest coming up that we'll be talking about redlining, the effect of climate on communities of color, particularly poor communities across America. We're going to play a headliner, I believe, guys.
Yeah, so I think we have a short clip from that episode that I was discussing earlier related to climate change and redlining and historical discriminatory housing policies. So if you cue that up, Manny, I think it'll help set the stage for the conversation we're having later.
Yes, indeed. And once again, to remind people who are watching us on the video cast, looks great. Looks like this is what we do for a living. We're so professional and gorgeous and handsome, especially with the lighting and all the things, and the TV that's now not working. No lavender. I'm not sure what happened there. And Chris rubbing his face like he has a sinus infection. But we're a podcast, an award-winning podcast that melds social justice journalism with original hip hop, and the music is part of what we do. So this is a little snippet from the topic redlining and climate change. You'll understand a little bit of what we're talking about.
In many ways, if the planet is getting warmer and we're seeing more frequent, more intense, and longer duration heat waves, then in many ways we are encountering what I would call a public health crisis that's very preventable. This is one of the most preventable natural hazards that we could encounter, and yet we are still seeing people die unnecessarily across the country.
Studies across the country, all around. Caught on Front Street to the up team. It's more than just a little musty, you're uncomfy. Keep getting too much heat. Sounding like a Trump speech, denying climate. No canopies or brush trees inside and rides. Denying bias while they flying bias. I hide behind the same tired lies. Well, time's up. Few degrees Fahrenheit up, you might bust. That's what pressure does, makes the pipes bust. That's why there's hell up in Harlem, that's why we starving. That's why they spit the same jargon, that's why we marching. That's why the Bronx was burning, it's not arson. That's why they carpet bagging and why they carbon overheating. And the heat in the apartment is like a swamp and they don't even care. It's the biggest market.
Is it possible that pollution...
So even though we highlight the rap part, it's a 40-minute long episode, the rap parts are interspersed, and we have the experts who are breaking down the issue and really letting us know how important this is, how urgent this is, and how underreported this is. This is what we tend to do. We tend to report the underreported. So I'm highlighting on the screen for those who you can see, redlining and climate change, a deadly combination. You can find this on your podcast feeds, wherever you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, et cetera, et cetera. You can make sure that you can follow us at Newsbeat, 2 words, or if you need to, find out what we're doing, go to usnewsbeat.com. You'll get links to all of the episodes. All of the episodes have a full featured story ahead of them. So not only can you listen to it and be blown away by the production quality and the voices of the experts and the music and the rappers that bring in like extraordinarily compelling punctuations to what we're doing, but you can also get more information about the causes, and then follow up with the organizations and the individuals that we highlight so that you can go maybe get involved, maybe find out a little bit more, maybe donate a little bit of money, maybe donate a little bit of your time, maybe know a little bit more about who's doing the work to highlight these problems. So we'll be getting into that a little bit more with Vivek, our guest, in just a smidge. Okay, let's go. We have about 10 minutes, guys. Let's rock. What are we getting into?
All right, so let's... I'd like to talk a little bit about these residential schools a little more.
Yeah, please.
So for those of you who don't know, Canada and other governments around the world forcibly stole Indigenous children, and kept them in what they call these residential schools, run by the government and also multiple religious denominations, mainly by the Catholic Church. And so when you hear, or maybe you just hear a thing, something, there were children that were found up in Canada at these schools.
Right.
The story is they were taken. There were night raids. This was actually codified into law, and it was to basically wipe Indigenous folks completely off the planet. That's not. I'm not even. And now, the pain and the trauma here. It's really hard to quantify. It's hard to even describe. Basically, if they weren't kidnapped, even without the parents' knowledge, then the parents were told, you have to give up these kids or you're going to prison. So there was many different ways they took these children, and they put them in these schools. The first thing that they did was they cut their hair, which in the Indigenous culture, their hair is very important. It's a sense of pride. It's a sense of their identity. So they took that from them. Then they changed their names to the names of saints and angels. So they no longer had their name, and they were forbidden to speak in their native tongues. They were forbidden to demonstrate any identifiable piece of their culture, whether it be dance or customs, anything like that. And the punishment was severe is not even the word, and they were beaten, they were abused. The more you dig into this stuff, it's just horrific isn't even the word too. Let me just see what they say. So in Canada, the only reason why we're even talking about this right now on the show is because the survivors spoke out, and this was it's very important to get this across. It's just incredible. It's called multi-generational trauma, and when you do this to someone, it's not just the children. And for the record, there are thousands upon thousands of children who never made it home. And that's what these unmarked graves are, and these mass graves are that you're hearing about on the news. again, it's mostly these communities that are taking upon themselves to actually search for these children in the hopes of actually returning them home. So I just want to go back real quick to that. I know we're trying to fit a lot in here, but the multi-generational trauma. So imagine the guilt on the parents for when they take these children. As a parent, there's the two of them on the show right now. I mean, not being able to protect your own children, not being able to save them, really, and so what happens? There's depression, there's alcoholism, there's drug abuse, there's suicide. There's a report that we share here. It's called Survivors Speak, and the whole point of this is to hear from the survivors, right? And I was going to read something from this thing, and I just asked people to just go and check it out, because it's one thing to hear about a child offing themselves, but to hear it over and over and over again is just, it's telling of the pain and the again, indescribable torture and suffering that these children went through, that this entire community went through, First Nations people overall. Because it's crazy when you look at it. So as bad as like the suicide rate was for the children in these schools, which was much higher than the general population, the suicide rate was actually multiple times higher for second generation survivors. Like the people who actually made it out and had children, Wow. And I want to play, if we could just play that one quick video clip. This is in a survivor. It's enough, it's one thing for me to talk about this, but to hear from an actual survivor, she talks about this, and she also talks about the healing power of actually sharing this story. So by listening to this, you're actually participating in the healing process. This was a woman, just real quick. This was a woman who was sent to these hellholes and was beaten severely for telling the head nun that she had just been raped by a priest there. And the level of sexual abuse at these schools, it's another whole level. I mean, I've never read anything like this before in my life.
Yeah, I'm gonna share her testimony. Obviously, a trigger warning that this gets into some serious content. So keep that in mind, folks. If that is something you wish to be concerned about, let's see if this works. Can you hear this? You guys heard that?
No, I don't hear it now.
Give me a second. It's difficult. It's outside of our normal way of doing things, so just hang on.
Hey, Chris, are you able to summarize the video while Manny pulls it up?
Yeah.
You got that?
We didn't hear anything still. Yeah, so basically, I mean, again, so she got sent to one of these schools. She describes in horrific detail, basically her fingers being broken by being cut with a ruler. Now, you can have a sharp ruler, you can have a dull ruler, but you imagine what it takes, the force it takes to break children's fingers with rulers. And it was this beating, that was only part of it. That was because she spoke out about being raped by these priests who ran these facilities. And, she then describes, again, that multi-generational trauma. It's how it gets passed down. It just doesn't end, for example, in these grave sites that they're finding. She then obviously fell into alcoholism. She fell into alcoholism and she took it out upon her own children. And she's finding healing now, though, just from sharing this.
Let me try one more time, guys.
People don't know who we are.
Okay.
When I was young, I got kidnapped from home. A plane came around, gave a letter to my dad. My dad said, I don't know how to read. I never went to school. But my uncle Malou went to school. He said, they come for Muriel and Alice. What for? My dad said, I don't know. They have to go to residential school. I'm doing a little bit sewing. I thought I was going to do some sewing, but I'd rather tell my story because I really feel It has to be healing somewhere. We were left in school for 9 years. Yeah, that's when lots of tragedy happened to me. I just turned 14. I talk about it, I'm so hurt. My fingers are all broken. They hit my finger ruler down because I got raped and by priests. That's where I learned to be who I was 40 years ago. I was not good. I was so mean to my children.
So I mean, this is just one of countless stories. There was an estimated 150,000 children taken in Canada, and again, this was all over the world. I'm not going to. We'll cut this brief now because we have a lot more to cover. But just recently, Deb Haaland, who's the very first Indigenous head of the Secretary of Interior here in the U.S., has announced that she wants to have an investigation here because those schools were here too.
Wow.
We will be following up. Thank you, Chris. It is a story that, again, I didn't really understand the depth of until we worked on it. Obviously, other organizations are covering it, but we encourage our folks to look into this. We will be bringing you more, and it will start hitting a little closer to home. So, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
All right, Brother Rashid.
Speaking of closer to home, yep, we're gonna go straight into the climate crisis because we have Vivek Shandas coming up in about 2 minutes. I'm sure everybody's been following what everybody is calling a heat wave. And I just think it's important because you don't even see it in this headline. But I think it's important for all of us to understand that this is climate change induced. So when you're seeing headlines on the Weather Channel or wherever you're getting your news, or if you're seeing somebody just talking about what's going on with the weather, I think it's important to frame it that way because we're just seeing such extreme temperatures across this country now for the last month, just these enormous spikes that you never see, that we've historically haven't really seen. It's been going up, but not to this level, and it's getting worse. Manny, you just showed that Wall Street Journal article. Mm-hmm. I think this news just broke right before you came on the show. Yeah. And the heat, it says right now, so for the podcast listeners, it says the extreme heat, I'm changing the title, caused at least 45 deaths in the Portland, Oregon area. And I think Oregon as a whole, the count right now is up to 60 something. It's getting higher and higher. And I think what people don't really know, because they don't hear about it a lot, is that extreme heat is the most common form of weather-related death annually in this country. And we always see if there's a hurricane or the tornado and there's the aftermath, right? We always get this sort of this crazy coverage of the journalist in the middle of the storm, and they make it like this big, dramatic TV event. Right. With extreme heat, we don't see it. It's a lot of times just people sitting in their homes or at work or wherever they may be, and there's no news cameras on them, and people are dying at terrible rates from heat in this country, and that's all because of what's been happening with the climate. So I just really wanted to focus on this story, especially with what's been happening in this country recently. And I just really hope that the media begins to change its tune, because I found an article which cited a study that showed that, yeah, Manny, you pulled it up. Major news networks devoted less than 4 hours to climate change in 2019 total. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, they're talking about, the Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC News, 4 hours. Just imagine. I wish I had the amount of hours they spent covering Trump and all the silly things and all the White House palace intrigue that happened over the course of his presidency. So I really hope that the media changes its tune, just because with a lot of things that we cover, like mass incarceration, the criminal justice system, without the focus and without the proper context, it gets lost on the public, and we really need to highlight these issues. So yeah, I really I encourage people to check out that report. and also to check out our redlining and climate episode that featured our guest, Vivek Shandas, who I think is here now, and I don't want to keep him waiting.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's hold on. You ended fast. I have to do the flashy flash thingy, or else it's not official. We have to welcome our guests with the flashy flash thingy. So let's do it.
All right. We're honored again to be having Vivek Shandas with Newsbeat and This Week in Social Justice. Vivek, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Sure. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, definitely. Vivek, you were great in that episode that we did on redlining and climate. It's obviously a horrific issue. Can you please, for everybody else, we're on the East Coast. Our viewers and listeners are spread out across the country. Can you just talk about what you're currently experiencing or have been experiencing over the last few weeks?
Yeah, it's been, when I looked about a week ago at my phone and saw the numbers in 111, 112, my mind at first went right to the fact that we are so not prepared for this. Like, this is a classic pandemic experience where we had, folks saying almost a decade ago, we need to have better pandemic surveillance. We need better systems in place to be able to ensure that we are able to develop vaccines quickly and distribute them quickly. And so it's very similar. We see a heat wave coming in. We're all kind of scrambling to try to figure out what to do. In fact, what's interesting is even in my own household, we didn't have air conditioning or anything like that. I hadn't really seen a need for it. And then when we saw this 111 coming up, we were like, oh my goodness, we have little ones in the community. We have not many people in the neighborhood that actually have AC. So we ended up getting a portable AC unit for our bedroom. And we actually, several of us huddled up in there because it was the only place we could be. And neighbors and others were coming over because they didn't have AC either. So we were just kind of hunkering down for a few days. It was pretty rough. And I will just say that as a researcher in this, I have this little infrared camera that I'm able to put into my phone. And I went around taking photos, which I'm happy to share, of what the city looked like during 115 degrees. And the official read, by the way, was 115. And we have sensitive temperature gauges and thermometers that we went around the city, and we actually clocked some neighborhoods at 124.
Wow.
It's unparalleled, the level of heat, and unprecedented the level of heat. And of course, those neighborhoods were the neighborhoods I've been watching for a really long time. Those are lower income neighborhoods, Black, African-American, Latino, Indigenous, people of color living predominantly in the neighborhoods. And it is one of those classic kind of natural disasters that collide with social marginalization. And we've seen that now in many different respects. The pandemic, of course, was a very clear revealing that. But with this infrared camera, I drove around, took some photos, walked a little bit, and actually took some photos of some camps, some houseless folks who were living in these tents along a major roadway. And I took a photo of just these tents there, and those were coming in at about 137 degrees Fahrenheit, which, as you might know, is lethal for human health. And thinking that people are living in those kind of environment and seeing their kind of silhouettes in the tents, I knew there were folks inside there. It really was kind of heart-wrenching to think how difficult it must be. And many of the deaths that are being identified are likely going to be folks who don't have access to cooling resources. So it's been rough. It's been really, really rough because we're just all scrambling and unable to cope with it.
Now, Vivek, in the episode that that you did with us, that study that you conducted, in a way, you're almost living it, right? These last couple of days. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that study and some of the major findings of that.
Sure. It's interesting. I live in a formerly redlined neighborhood, and so the study has become even more pronounced because of this particular heat wave. And what's really interesting to me is that we were in this study just trying to tease out why we were seeing this consistent pattern across the country of lower income people of color living in neighborhoods that were warmer by measured and empirically validated than the than other neighborhoods that were wealthier, often whiter. And we were seeing that pattern, and a lot of folks were, saying that this might have to do with various reasons related to the luxury effect, people having more money, being able to pay more for landscaping around their house, their street, etc. But we wanted to really question that and ask whether this is a more systemic thing, and rather than an individual decision being made, we wanted to see, is this pattern consistent across the country? So we looked at 108 cities across the country, used satellite imagery to evaluate how hot specific neighborhoods were. And we used these maps that were done by the University of Richmond, digitized maps of historic redlining, where we'd have A, B, C, and D neighborhoods, A neighborhoods being, quote, the best from a risk point of view, like can we provide a mortgage, will those mortgages be repaid? Nothing factual about this. This was all race-based. It was all based on who lived there, whether they were white and wealthy. They were often considered the best neighborhoods. B was definitely, D was still desirable. C neighborhoods, as they were graded, were declining neighborhoods, and D were, quote, hazardous neighborhoods. And it was mostly immigrant, low income, and communities of color that were living in those D-graded neighborhoods. And we found consistently across the country, in the cities that we studied, that the D and C neighborhoods were on the order of about 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than their non-redlined counterparts. So the redlining is about the hazardous, drawing red lines around specific neighborhoods that were deemed hazardous, and that's where the term comes from. But the C and D neighborhoods were consistently hotter than that B and A neighborhoods. And so we looked a little further, saw that, of course, the C and D neighborhoods have more freeways through them, have more big box stores, have more industrial facilities immediately next to them. And so all of those things attract or absorb that sun solar radiation, push it back out, and the adjacent neighborhoods really take on a lot of that heat. And we were consistently finding those neighborhoods hotter and less treed, and communities of color living still in those neighborhoods intergenerationally. And so that really gave us pause about the fact that this is not something of an individual decision about landscaping or this or that. It's actually a systemic thing that was promulgated by the federal government and pushed onto local communities and still endures today. And so that's just a quick 3-minute summary of that paper.
Hey, Vivek, I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned in your previous response. This idea that you had to go out and buy an AC unit. Can you explain to people how unusual it is for people in your area in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, to actually have ACs in their homes, and why that is because of the climate? And on top of that, can you just talk about how that is potentially that lack of having maybe the means to get an AC unit could potentially lead to a public health crisis or deaths in these areas?
Yeah, I will first just reference the indigenous communities that have been living here. And in fact, the indigenous communities, there's evidence that it's one of the highest densities of indigenous tribes of any part of North America were living in the Pacific Northwest. And there's a reason for that. I mean, the streams are chock full of salmon, or were, before the big turbines and lots of dams had been put in. The landscape is lush. It doesn't get really below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, doesn't get above 90 degrees very often. It's really this kind of sweet spot temperate zone. And what we're seeing with the turning up of temperatures is that the ecology that sustain large populations are being affected, and the building that we're doing has no code or regulations to be responsive to rising temperatures. And so the building stock that we put in now and continue to put in are all essentially amplifying these temperatures. And so when you get denser neighborhoods, which are really helpful for getting access to goods and services in these dense communities, we're not building those with heat in mind. And so where a lot of high density development goes is also where a lot of lower income renters live. And those are areas are hotter. And on top of that, AC units are really, even 10 years ago when we looked at the data, there was only about 30% of the households in Portland that had AC units. If you take it to Seattle, it was only about 15 to 20% of households. Now, since 2012, we've seen this kind of uptick in the number of AC units, central AC units, mostly going into new developments, newer, wealthier developments, higher end developments with these central AC units. And so now we're up to about 56 to 60% AC, central AC in Portland. And so we're seeing this rise in the amount of AC in Portland. It hasn't quite kept up like that in Seattle or Vancouver, British Columbia. And that gets us into the fact that I could go out as somebody who has a day job, has a position that allows me to go and purchase an AC unit, run the AC unit, even in one specific room. And AC, if those listeners that don't know, AC is one of the biggest energy hogs that you could get. You could get a bunch of freezers, you could get a bunch of refrigerators, you get a bunch of toasters and TVs, but you're not going to be running as much as an AC. It's a very energy intensive, and you see that hit on your energy bill when you get it at the end of the month. You'll see how much it demands. And so a lot of communities can't afford to, let alone buy an AC. Places like New York City and other counties gave away ACs last summer because they were closing cooling centers and things like that. Yet being without energy efficiency credits or any programs, running an AC is really expensive. And so being able to get access to an AC unit and the historic temperate climates here, we're just not prepared. And therefore thinking about an AC has been really kind of a big leap of like, wow, are we there yet? Yes, we're definitely there. This was a wake-up call. And most stores I went to were flush out of ACs. And so even trying to get one, if you could get one, they're on back order. Right. And so we really endured this the best way we could. And I really worry about the neighbors and folks who are older, pre-existing health conditions, those who have had COVID even. We're seeing some evidence that those who've had COVID are being disproportionately affected by heat as well. And so there's some really interesting and important concerning factors that play into the vulnerability of communities when it comes to heat. And AC is one immediate solution, but it's definitely not a long-term one.
Wow. And Vivek, I want to talk about the areas that so you just went into great detail about these neighborhoods and these areas that aren't used to such heat. And I want to bring it back a little bit to the redlining and your report. And you talked about these urban heat islands. And something that's always sort of haunted me since our last conversation was that sort of second wave, right? That you described that when at night everyone thinks, oh, okay, it's great, we'll leave the windows open, it'll get a lot cooler. But in these particular neighborhoods, the heat actually rises, right? And it essentially slowly chokes these people to death, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the most, I think, pernicious and concerning aspect of this is the fact that when you see a weather forecast, and I saw those everyone around here is paying very close to them, as well as many other parts of the world and country. You see the weather forecast, and it's one number for a city. And what is really misleading about the way the National Weather Service presents that is that is the overall average for that region. And it takes, for me, the concern, it takes agency away from the fact that Mother Nature, yes, is putting some heat upon us, though what it doesn't necessarily convey is that when you look at it with greater detail, in these redlined areas, in these non-redlined areas, you start seeing differences within one metro region, within one neighborhood, and within one city street. And when we start seeing those differences, and we ask that profound question of why do we see those differences, it allows us to get a little bit of agency about the fact that we actually can ameliorate some of those intense effects of heat on our neighborhoods, on our communities, on our vulnerable populations. And when you get this one monolithic number of a temperature reading, it kind of absolves all of that from being something we can directly change. And so the most hopeful thing that I could say about the fact that we're getting better data about where the hottest places are, its relation to historic planning policies and segregation and racial covenants that have been put in, that have removed green spaces, have created denser materials, have created more heat absorbing materials, more larger surfaces that can absorb materials in these redlined neighborhoods. That gives us a little bit of pause of saying, hey, wait, we did this through our decision-making systems, and similarly, we can undo these through our decision-making systems. So the challenge now is to be able to get enough of the momentum amongst the communities, among the decision makers, amongst the vast organizations that work in this, to recognize that that difference in heat is totally self-induced, and that the 124 degree Fahrenheit temperature I recorded yesterday and day before yesterday, it can be actually brought down to about 95 degrees, which is another neighborhood on the same day when we were going out and collecting temperatures. I mean, that difference is all human induced. And it's a difference of life and death when you're talking about that range of temperature. If you have a vulnerable person in a 95 degree neighborhood versus a 120 degree neighborhood, huge difference and big impact.
Wow. Vivek, thank you for your time. We have one last question, if you don't mind. And you mentioned immediate solutions such as, ACs, and if you're able to get that to people's hands, but obviously the affordability once you run them. You're an urban planning expert. I mean, what do you envision for the future of your city going forward? What has to be done to really, change the game in terms of, what's happening with the climate?
Yeah, we can do the short-term, medium-term stuff. Like, let's plant the trees. Let's get green spaces in there. Let's get communities to co-own those and govern those. Let's really do it from a ground-up perspective. And let's get the paints on there. Let's get the lighter-colored rooftops so they can bounce the solar radiation off. Let's get the orientation and the configuration of the buildings so that they better allow air to move between them and that convective current to really reduce the surface temperatures of building materials. Let's do all that stuff in the short term. Let's create block parties so that people could get to know each other and perhaps even know who might be vulnerable on your street during a heat wave and check in on them during these heat waves. Let's do all those things. What I'm keenly interested in are two things in the long term, however. One is to get all the codes and regulations and standards for designing our cities to really recognize that heat is a serious and tragic, yet preventable natural hazard. And that is something we haven't done in any city in the US, and something that can be done just directly through local codes and local governance. So getting those new buildings, getting those retrofit buildings to be more heat sensitive and heat smart, I guess, would be the means by which we can move that. And that's not going to happen unless we get the second part, which is FEMA recognizing that heat is a natural hazard. We have explosions as a natural hazard for FEMA. We have human caused is another category of incident for FEMA. We have, of course, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. But heat is not in there, nor is the pandemic. But heat is another thing we need to be able to get resources to local agencies so that they can do the good work of preparing and reducing the excess mortality that we're hearing about from these events.
Well, Vivek, again, we really appreciate your time and your insights and the research that you do. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say what you're talking about could save lives. And I just hope policymakers and people who are important are listening. So, Vivek, again, thank you so much for coming on the show, and please stay safe.
Yeah, really appreciate the time. Thanks for the attention to this.
Take care.
Bye.
Wow, Chris. I mean, again, this is just the first interview we did with him for the podcast was amazing, but now he's in the middle of it.
It's
basically everything that he talked about.
Literally, and he's walking around.
He's actually living it.
And he's walking around with a heat camera and studying this stuff. I mean, I can't even, and his study was, from what I understand, right? It was one of the first or the first looking at this, at this effect. It was sort of a landmark study. I think other people have been sort of digging into it. But as you know, I mean, we did the story, other mainstream media outlets caught on because it's so important. And
that anecdote that he shared, just driving across the city and finding those various disparate temperatures, the thing that he talked about, everybody's watching the meteorologist on TV, but that one number does not explain what someone in another part of the city, a formerly redlined area of that city, is experiencing. And this is potentially the norm for people going forward. It's tragic,
bro. He said 137 or 134, 130 plus degrees
at a homeless camp, right? That was the
homeless camp. 130, dude. Like that's if your pork loin is 130 degrees, you can almost eat that thing. Like that's barbecue temperature. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
Yeah. The reason why, really quick, I wanted to focus when he said it. This thing about ACs, like we live in New York, we have New Jersey, we're Newark, we have ACs running. It's hot.
Sure.
The idea that these areas in the Pacific Northwest never needed it, but now it's like us going out to get a generator during hurricane.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. It makes sense. My wife and I were talking about this before the show, and I was like, look, they're like 38 feet from Canada. Like you wouldn't think that like air conditioners is their top priority of amenities, in their abodes. But lo and behold, it's and this isn't something that happened today, because obviously our guy was researching this for quite some time.
Yeah, and to his point too, I mean, they're unprepared. We have a team member, more creative team member, lives in Seattle. Shout out Jeffrey Howard, and I spoke with him. I zoomed with him the other day, and he said, I think it's 50% or something like that had some semblance of an air conditioner to stay cool. He said, also the homeless population there. I mean, we're just literally cooking in the street. Literally. There weren't, as far as he knew, many cooling stations or the municipalities really doing anything at all to help these folks.
Can we just say, I know we didn't go into it tonight, but it's important to know, obviously pay attention to these things. All things are local. If you're in an area where the heat is a problem and we have unprecedented temperature spikes, press your local law enforcement, legislature and mayors and all that. What are you doing about the homeless people? What are you doing about the poor people? Do you have cooling centers open? Do the things that you can do as someone who might be privileged enough to not, to just be minor, inconvenience or uncomfort. But can we just, I know we're not going into this tonight, but the jails and prisons.
Oh, you mean in terms of the climate?
Yeah, in terms of the heat and the situation. Just touch on it. I know we're working on some things. I just want people to think about that and never forget about our family members, our loved ones, and members of society who, and very, very often shouldn't be in prison in the first place, who are disproportionately in prison and jails, who are now suffering under these extreme conditions as well.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, I think we're working on an episode right now. I'm glad you brought it up. We can briefly talk about it. But the climate, obviously, just imagine us sitting here, Vivek, his family, they're all huddled around AC because it's hot. If you're living in a prison, there's many states in this country, especially in the South, which they do not have universal AC. And with the heat rising and with the way that those buildings were constructed, especially many, I think pre-World War II, right, Chris? There's so many.
Yeah, I mean, some. I think just post Civil War, some of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Damn.
Yeah, so these places are not built to handle this kind of heat, and people are suffering, and people are potentially dying. There's that horrific story from a few years ago, the guy in Rikers, who died from the heat in New York City. So we're going to be exploring that. I'm glad you brought it up, but it just goes to show that there's so many ways that climate is connected with people's lives. And I just really want the media to start really focusing on the human toll. And hopefully by focusing on the human toll, we can start investing resources into combating this.
Not only that, the argument that climate change and infrastructure aren't coexistent, right? Like, the whole discussion of whether climate money should be put, or funding for climate issues should be incorporated into infrastructure bills on Capitol Hill. There are power lines that are melting,
streets that are buckling.
Streets, yeah.
That's the infrastructure.
It's like it's the streets
Those are
and
the
the
roads.
power. They're not able to handle the heat that is caused by the climate change. I don't know how much clearer it could be. So if you're not up on these things, again, as I often like to say, every 4 years we hem and haw and we have a big thing about presidential elections. There's a lot happening in between those cycles. There's a lot happening right now. And you might find an issue that we talk about that touches your soul, touches your spirit, that you can then go and act upon. So we encourage you to do so. Please pay attention to what we're doing here on This Week in Social Justice or in Newsbeat, the podcast. We touch on these issues. We break it down.
And really quick, if I could just add something to that point, Manny.
Yeah, please.
Sunrise Movement, which was actually some of them were part of Biden's before he was in office about this committee, right, to combat climate change. They're bringing the fight to him. Yesterday, they were blocking entrances to the White House. But not only that, I mean, they had harsh words for him. They had signs saying, "Biden, you coward, fight for us." I mean, that's pretty remarkable because you don't really see that from the groups that, that were not really saying giving you full-throated support, but groups that you were talking with prior to entering the White House as part of your plan for the climate. So that's an important point that you just mentioned. Just people fighting back and trying to raise their voices.
Well, it sounds like someone burned Biden. Someone gave him a burn. And all I know is that's a
little catchy. That's catchy.
I'm working on something. Burn Biden. Burn. I'm working on something. Let's see what happens next episode.
It's gonna be a good segment.
All right. Well, we have to burn Biden. Certainly the better choice in some people's opinions, ours, mine. Maybe not young. Than in last presidential election, but a lot of work to be done. A lot of things. We're not a political show. So you can go listen to Pod Save the Peoples and stuff, whatever their show is called. We'll talk about the social justice stuff.
I just threw up in my mouth.
Yeah. Anyway, so with that said, what do we have left, my friends? What do we have left?
I think we have the past and future combined.
Well, geez, the past. What is this? An episode of Manifest?
Well, time is a straight line. I think something.
You watched that?
Walter Bishop reference.
Oh, here we go with the. All right, so then I'll do this flash.
Wait, are we talking UFO report? I'm sorry, no.
See, all right. So the past looks like this, and the future looks like this. All right, Chris. It's all yours.
So the reason why the time continuum has merged there, and the gravitational waves have. I'm sorry. Now it's Medgar Evers. His birthday is coming up on July 2nd.
Yes.
And his assassination was on June 12th. And I don't think we were live that week, so we didn't really get a chance to talk to him about him. But so Medgar Evers, one of the, I would say probably a hugely unsung hero of the civil rights movement, and just an incredible human in general. World War II veteran, served in Normandy. I think he was stationed in Germany for a while. Came back, and he couldn't even vote under threat of white supremacists with shotguns outside the polling station. Right. And so he just dedicated his life to making things right. And in one of the most dangerous states for an African American, Mississippi. And what he did, and I mean, it's an incredible story, but the details that I've learned about his life, but he became the very first field agent for the NAACP in Mississippi.
Right.
And basically that meant every single day you could be taken out. And he did this. He he enrolled. He made it one of the largest, I think, chapters of the organization in the country. He enrolled countless people to vote. He's critical with the desegregation of Mississippi State University, which he actually tried to enroll in and was denied, and then found a student in a similar situation, brought them to the NAACP. Thurgood Marshall took up the case and went to the Supreme Court, and they won the case. I could go on and on. Tragically, and it's incredible, like these micro stories in there. He started investigating lynchings when he sort of first took that role. One of his first cases was Emmett Till, who we've spoken about several times on the show.
Right.
The 14-year-old who was brutally murdered, not far from Jackson, Mississippi, and he being a veteran, he recognized there was this lot across the street from his house that would make a good sniper's nest, and to protect against that, him and his wife Merle, who we'll get to in a second, would never leave the car. Imagine that, having to drive to your house, your own home, and not being able to get out of the driver's side door. They would always lead through the other side. He actually fortified the house a little bit. He had 2 children who had to run through drills on what to do if you hear a gunshot. And tragically, on June 12th, 1963, a white supremacist shot him in the back as he was walking to get to his front door. And I mean, the story, it goes on and on, but he was denied service at the local hospital. He's actually the very first African-American ever led into that hospital. He obviously died, though. And the FBI launched an investigation. They quickly found the rifle, I guess, across the street or whatever, or close proximity. And they had their suspect, Byron Beckworth, this local white supremacist. 2 times it went to trial, all white juries, acquitted both times.
Justice, I was gonna say, let me guess, but that would have been my guess. Yeah.
His wife, during this time, she took up the torch. She actually led the NAACP. She became the president of NAACP at some point. She's still a legend. She's still around. She spoke at Obama's inauguration, I think the first one. And she never gave up the pursuit of justice. And 30 years later, in 1994, I think it was, the guy was found guilty. They reopened the case. He was found guilty, but he only survived 7 years before his death. He had a heart attack in prison. But yeah, so time and space collide for Medgar Evers, and I'm proud to say that on this show.
There you go. Listen, it's a less document, just like we saw with Judas and the Black Messiah, Fred Hampton, stories that are just now coming to light. It's not that there haven't been books written about it. We're not breaking news here, but we're able to have this platform, just like others are able to have the platform and tell the stories that have been often whitewashed, for lack of a better term, or quelled or quieted, as we learned about Tulsa, as we learned about the communities that have been sunken under man-made lakes. You're starting to hear things today in greater detail and in greater frequency. So we're happy to be able to tell this story because even though it's tragic and obviously is another sore spot on the tapestry of American history, it is something that needs to be talked about, needs to be known about, and can be inspiring if you know how well he fought for the freedoms and the liberties that we wish upon all of our citizens. So thank you, Chris, for bringing that to our attention.
Definitely.
All right, with that, everyone, I think we're done. This has been This Week in Social Justice for June 30th, 2021, the year of whatever Lord you choose. And we are here every Wednesday, except for the Wednesdays we're not, live on your YouTubes and your Facebookuses and your Twitches if you're twitchy. And of course, you can find out more about us at US newsbeat.com. The podcast feed will get this audio rendition rendered relatively quickly, depending on exactly what I decide to do next. And you'll be able to find out more about us. usnewsbeat.com. All of our episodes have full in-depth stories penned by these fabulous journalist folk who will give you the backstory behind the front story. And we've got a couple of great full-length Newsbeat episodes that incorporate social justice journalism with original hip-hop lyrical contributions. It makes for a very compelling and entertaining in some way, even though these are heavy topics, a very entertaining listen. Shouts to our artist in residence, Silent Night. Shouts to our artist in residence, Liquid, and our previous collaborators. We are bringing back, because just like COVID, we were a little bit quiet with our artistic collaborations over the past year. We're bringing back our artists. We're bringing back the Democracy Now! Meets Black Thought from the Roots kind of vibe. So usnewsbeat.com, Newsbeat, wherever you find podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And This Week in Social Justice, live on the video tip. Thanks to Kitty Bradshaw for checking in. Shouts to Manny Jelonsky, one of the only other Mannys that I recognize and acknowledge in the world. Shouts to everyone else tuned in and turned up with us for This Week in Social Justice. We will be back Wednesdays live at 8 p.m. Eastern, except for the weeks that we're not. Gentlemen, any parting words? Thanks to, I just want to say thanks to Maury Creative Studios, our parent family. Let me get Medgar off the screen. I got into a vibe there, and I forgot that we still had. Okay, shouts to Maury Creative Studios, and a fantastic digital marketing agency located in New York, but handling clients all over the country now, as you mentioned earlier, Chris. We got folks all over the place. If your company is large and looking to get larger with fantastic marketing and inbound marketing, sales development, all kind of cool businessy things, please do visit Maury Creative Studios. The live stream has been brought. Oh, look, I lost the thing. The live stream has been brought to you by Maury Creative Studios and Manny Faces Media. I'm the one behind some of this technology. So you can find out more about me and the other podcasts that I produce, including Hip Hop Can Save America, including Unfucking the Republic, which is a great new podcast.
I wanted to make sure we gave a shout out to them. They featured us on a recent episode about Milton Friedman.
Yes, indeed. So shouts to them under my production company, Manny Faces Media, and in conjunction, this and some other shows with Maury Creative Studios. Anyway, check out all the things we do. We're doing fabulous work. We'll be here next Wednesday at 8 p.m. live. I'm putting in my food order. That's why if you see me, I'm looking a little distracted. I got to put in my food order. Any last words, gentlemen?
Yeah, I'm really hungry. So if you could, I'll text you the address. Because for some reason, this show just makes me famished.
I've got some incredible floaters in the fridge here in the office. So
it's the talking. Shouts to everyone who checked us out, either live or on the replay.
Floaters.
Please find a way to contact us and just let us know you're listening. Let us know you appreciate what we do. Give us any ideas or suggestions for topics, something you want to hear more about, something you don't hear enough about on the news. I'm going to go turn on the cable news and watch 97 minutes straight of Bill Cosby, and then I'll
do that. Don't do that.
I'm not going to do it. I'm going to watch. Is there basketball tonight? I think there is. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got. I'm done.
All right. Yep. This was a good show. Looking forward to next week. Burn, Biden, burn.
Burn, Biden, burn. Disco and...
He did it again.
And we are still live.
He did it again.
In 10, 9. What do you think of the show? We're live, so we could...
I realized I left without ending the show.
We were gonna have a post game by ourselves, so
that would have been. You would talk about me behind my back, wouldn't you?
No, I knew it was live. I mean, we would wait for it to unlive.
Well, it's unlive now.